10 methods of death. Number 1. Struggle for breath. Death by drowning has a certain dark romance to it. Countless literary heroines have met their end slipping beneath the waves with billowy layers of petticoats floating around their heads. In reality, suffocating to death in water is neither pretty nor painless, though it can be surprisingly swift. Just how fast people drown depends on several factors, including swimming ability and water temperature. In the UK, where the water is generally cold, 55% of open water drownings occur within 3 meters of safety. 2/3 of victims are good swimmers, suggesting that people can get into difficulties within seconds, says Mike Tipton, a physiologist and expert in marine survival at the University of Portsmouth in the UK. Typically, when a victim realizes that they cannot keep their head above water, they tend to panic, leading to the classic surface struggle. They gasp for air at the surface and hold their breath as they bob beneath, says Tipton. Struggling to breathe, they can't call for help. Their bodies are upright, arms weakly grasping, as if trying to climb a non-existent ladder from the sea. Studies with New York lifeguards in the 1950s and 1960s found that this stage lasts just 20 to 60 seconds. When victims eventually submerge, they hold their breath for as long as possible, typically 30 to 90 seconds. After that, they inhale some water, splutter, cough and inhale more. Water in the lungs blocks gas exchange in delicate tissues, while inhaling water also triggers the airway to seal shut, a reflex called a laryngospasm. There is a feeling of tearing and a burning sensation in the chest as water goes down into the airway. Then that sort of slips into a feeling of calmness and tranquility, says Tipton, describing reports from survivors. That calmness represents the beginnings of the loss of consciousness from oxygen deprivation, which eventually results in the heart stopping and brain death. Number 2. Heart attack. The Hollywood heart attack, featuring sudden pain, desperate chest clutching and immediate collapse, certainly happens in a few cases. But a typical myocardial infarction, as medical speak has it, is a lot less dramatic and comes on slowly, beginning with mild discomfort. The most common symptom is, of course, chest pain, a tightness, pressure or squeezing, often described as an elephant on my chest, which may be lasting or come and go. This is the heart muscle struggling and dying from oxygen deprivation. Pain can radiate to the jaw, throat, back, belly and arms. Other signs and symptoms include shortness of breath, nausea and cold sweats. Most victims delay before seeking assistance, waiting an average of 2 to 6 hours. Women are the worst, probably because they are more likely to experience less well-known symptoms, such as breathlessness, back or jaw pain, or nausea, says Joanne Manson, an epidemiologist at Harvard Medical School. Survivors say they just didn't want to make a fuss, that it felt more like indigestion, tiredness or muscle cramps than a heart attack. Then again, some victims are just in denial. Delay costs lives. Most people who die from heart attacks do so before reaching hospital. The actual cause of death is often heart arrhythmia, disruption of the normal heart rhythm. In other words, even small heart attacks can play havoc with the electrical impulses that control heart muscle contraction, effectively stopping it. In about 10 seconds the person loses consciousness, and minutes later they are dead. Patients who make it to hospital quickly fare much better. In the UK and US, more than 85% of heart attack patients admitted to hospital survive to 30 days. Hospitals can deploy defibrillators to shock the heart back into rhythm, and clot-busting drugs and artery-clearing surgery. Number 3. Bleeding to death. The speed of exsanguination, as bleeding to death is known, depends on the source of the bleed, says John Cartbeek at the University of Calgary in Alberta, Canada, and chair of Advanced Trauma Life Support for the American College of Surgeons. People can bleed to death in seconds if the aorta, the major blood vessel leading from the heart, is completely severed. For example, after a severe fall or car accident, death could creep up much more slowly if a smaller vein or artery is nicked, even taking hours. Such victims would experience several stages of hemorrhagic shock. The average adult has 5 liters of blood. Losses of around 750 milliliters generally cause few symptoms. Anyone losing 1.5 liters, either through an external wound or internal bleeding, feels weak, thirsty and anxious, and would be breathing fast. By 2 liters, people experience dizziness, confusion and then eventual unconsciousness. Survivors of hemorrhagic shock describe many different experiences, ranging from fear to relative calm, Coleridge says. In large part this would depend on what and how extensive the associated injuries were. A single penetrating wound to the femoral artery in the leg might be less painful than multiple fractures sustained in a motor vehicle crash. Number 4. Fire. Long the fate of witches and heretics. Burning to death is torture. Hot smoke and flames singe eyebrows and hair and burn the throat and airways, making it hard to breathe. Burns inflict immediate and intense pain through stimulation of the nociceptors, the pain nerves in the skin. To make matters worse, burns also trigger a rapid inflammatory response, which boosts sensitivity to pain in the injured tissues and surrounding areas. As burn intensities progress, some feeling is lost but not much, says David Herndon, a burns care specialist at University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. Third-degree burns do not hurt as much as second-degree wounds, as superficial nerves are destroyed. But the difference is semantic. Large burns are horrifically painful in any instance. Some victims of severe burns report not feeling their injuries while they are still in danger or intent on saving others. Once the adrenaline and shock wear off, however, the pain quickly sets in. Pain management remains one of the most challenging medical problems in the care of burns victims. Most people who die in fires do not in fact die from burns. The most common cause of death is inhaling toxic gases, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide and even hydrogen cyanide, together with the suffocating lack of oxygen. One study of fire deaths in Norway from 1996 found that almost 75% of the 286 people autopsied had died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Depending on the size of the fire and how close you are to it, concentrations of carbon monoxide could start to cause headache and drowsiness in minutes, eventually leading to unconsciousness. According to the U.S. National Fire Protection Association, 40% of the victims of fatal home fires are knocked out by fumes before they can even wake up. Number 5. Electrocution. In accidental electrocutions, usually involving low household current, the most common cause of death is arrhythmia, stopping the heart dead. Unconsciousness ensues after the standard 10 seconds, says Richard Trauman, a cardiologist at Rush University in Chicago. One study of electrocution deaths in Montreal, Canada found that 92% had probably died from arrhythmia. Higher currents can produce nearly immediate unconsciousness. The electric chair was designed to produce instant loss of consciousness and painless death, a step up from traditional hangings, by conducting the current through the brain and the heart. Whether it achieves this end is debatable. Studies on dogs in 1950 found that electrodes had to be placed on either side of the head to ensure sufficient current passed through the brain to knock the creature out. There have been many botched executions, those that required several jolts to kill, or where flames leapt from the prisoner's head, in one case due to a damp synthetic sponge being attached to the electrodes on the prisoner's head, which was such a poor conductor it was heated up by the current and caught fire. An analysis in 2005 of post-mortem remains from 43 prisoners sentenced to death by electrocution, found the most common visible injuries to be head and leg burns where the electrodes were attached. The study's senior author, William Hamilton, a medical examiner in Florida, concluded that these burns occurred post-mortem and that death was indeed instantaneous. However, John Wixwell, a biophysicist at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, maintains that the thick, insulating bones of the skull would prevent sufficient current from reaching the brain, and prisoners could instead be dying from heating of the brain, or perhaps from suffocation due to paralysis of the breathing muscles. Either way, an unpleasant way to go.